Have you felt that sudden twinge of guilt or failure when you've eaten something that you shouldn't? Good foods and bad foods. We all have an internalized food police that leads us to categorizing foods. Every food decision is quickly appraised by the food police, and we either punish or praise ourselves for our behaviors. It's an exhausting approach to food, and we never seem to win. But what if you could stop the food police altogether? In today's video, I'm going to uncover what really happens when we internalize the food police, and how you can challenge these beliefs in your own life to find freedom from food, chronic dieting, and binge eating. By the end of this video, you'll have practical strategies to overcome the food police. Managing an eating disorder is a lonely journey. For in-depth information and strategies for managing your eating disorder, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell in the corner so you're notified when I post a new video every Wednesday. I'm Meredith MacKenzie of Parallel Wellness. I'm a registered clinical counselor, eating disorders therapist, and doctoral graduate student. In my work with hundreds of clients with eating disorders, I've supported them to loosen the grips of their eating disorder and live fulfilling lives with freedom from food and compensatory behaviors. Now it's your turn. Before we get started, I want to provide a disclaimer that while I am a registered clinical counselor, the purposes of this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you are concerned that you may have an eating disorder, please reach out to a registered professional for appropriate help. In the last few weeks on this channel, I've been doing a series on intuitive eating by Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribble. And if you haven't seen those videos, you might want to stop now and go back and watch them. I provide the links for them in the description box down below. But to get started, they have created a whole program around intuitive eating and teaching people how to incorporate the principles of intuitive eating into their lives. If you're interested in reading their book, which the information from today's video is from, it's called Intuitive Eating, a Revolutionary Anti-Diet. I've provided a link in the description box down below where you can buy a copy for yourself. So when I say the word food police, what comes to mind for you? The food police are an internalized set of values and beliefs that are developed based on the diet culture and our society's view of the thin ideal and what is considered good and bad food. Once we've internalized the food police, which happens over time as we grow up, the food police monitors every bite we eat. This is that little voice inside of us that criticizes us when we eat something that's labeled as bad, or monitors what we're eating and gives us suggestions for what we should be eating. And the food police is that feeling of failure that you feel after you've eaten something that's on the do not eat list. And it's responsible for that guilt that we feel. And when I explain the food police to people, I ask them to consider, what was it like for you when you were a child? Or do you know a child in your life and just look at how they're eating? Children typically eat what they want, when they want it, if it's accessible to them. And they don't have this internalized sense of what is good food or bad food until we teach it to them. And beyond not having yet internalized the food police, young children are great, natural, intuitive eaters. They listen to their body's cues for when they're hungry and when they're full, and they have no problem letting us know that. And children don't feel guilty about what they eat. So that internalized food police that you have inside of you is developed over time. For anyone who's experienced binge eating or chronic dieting, you might recognize the food police pop up when you may have for a period of time eaten all the good foods, or you're going according to what your diet plan says, and then you deviate from this and you eat something that's been restricted, or you eat too much of what's restricted. I feel like anytime I say something that sounds a little bit extreme, there should just be automatic air quotes. Otherwise, my hand's gonna get tired, because really there is no too much of anything. But let's just go back to what I was saying. So if you feel this onslaught of emotions that comes after you eat something that you shouldn't have, that is the food police. And it really destroys any perception that you have of having dieting success, because it feels like it's almost like an all or nothing situation. Either you're all into the diet and you're being successful and you're doing what you're supposed to do, or the food police catches you speeding and says, hold on there, you shouldn't be eating this, and you get a ticket. And when that happens, oftentimes people who experience binge eating or chronic dieting will say, well, then why bother? Why should I keep putting myself through this? I might as well just eat everything that I want. And then they go the opposite direction and they end up overeating on things that have been put on the no list by the food police. And a big challenge for people who are attempting to overcome restrictive eating or overeating, binge eating, disordered eating is to be able to say to themselves, just because you said it doesn't make it true. Just because the advertisers say it or just because your family member says it does not mean that these foods are good or bad. They actually have no moral value. Now, I'm really curious. Comment down below and tell me about a time that you received unsolicited advice about the food that you're eating or should be eating, and how you would like to respond now that you know a little bit more about the food police or you're learning about intuitive eating. Now, when talking about intuitive eating, it's important to recognize that there's various voices and messages that we can tap into that that give us ideas about what we should be eating or what we shouldn't be eating and how to go about eating. And they really influence our decision making. There are both destructive dieting voices and powerful ally voices that impact how we feel about ourselves and our eating and ultimately impact our eating behavior. For dieters or people that engage in disordered eating, there are three voices or messages that are present. They are the food police, the diet rebel, and the nutrition informant. The food police, as I've been mentioning, judges you for what you're eating, how you're eating, and bases this judgment on food rules that dieting and society have laid out. Examples of this would be you're eating too many carbs, or you're eating outside of the window that you should be eating. You're eating too much, or you haven't earned the right to eat because you haven't exercised or been active enough in that period. And the reality is that there's no real benefit to this. It's a lose-lose situation when the food police are present. As I mentioned in my video last week on ending restrictive eating, when we live by the food rules set out by the food police and we deprive ourselves of eating specific foods or certain quantities of foods or eating within a certain amount of time, all we do is increase our desire for these foods. So really, the food police just makes it more difficult for ourselves to eat in a way that is actually genuinely healthy and free for ourselves. And while we want to believe that we're the ones that are in control of this, it's really the food police that is in control of all of our eating. Another voice that dieters and people who engage in disordered eating are really ruled by is the nutritional informant. Now, the difficult thing that we come to realize is that the nutrition informant claims to be all about our health, however, it's a total facade. The nutrition informant provides us with information about counting macros and avoiding food additives, which seems like it's based in science, seems like it's based in healthy information. However, the nutrition informant is still under the regulation of the food police. So rather than giving us food that's genuinely based in our health, it's another way of restricting ourselves. Now, what's common is people will recognize that their restrictive eating or their eating disorder behaviors has really gotten in the way of them being able to live a full life. And so they will make the decision, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. I am going to open up the range of foods that I'm eating, and I'm doing this for the good of my health. However, the challenge that people often face is that because the nutrition informant and the food police are still actively influencing their mindset about food and how they feel about themselves and their bodies, that when they decide that they're going to completely abolish diet mentality from their lives, they are still ruled by this desire to lose weight or be within a weight range that fits the thin ideal. And because they're strictly married to this idea, the food police and nutrition informant are still active. So while they may be buying into habits that, people market as this is healthy, this is a lifestyle change, it's a really sneaky and insidious way to still be engaging with the nutrition informant and the food police, and continues to promote dieting behaviors on a more unconscious level. An example that is provided in the intuitive eating book is of a woman who is maybe at work and she says, okay, I recognize that I'm hungry. I'm going to honor my hunger cues and I'm going to eat something. And that this healthy eating mindset, which is really the nutrition informant, says, well, I'm going to eat an apple. That's a healthy choice. And sure, it's a great choice. And after eating the apple, about an hour later, this woman says, oh, I'm hungry again. And then the food police pops up and says, well, you shouldn't be hungry again. You just ate something that was healthy and that should be enough. And so rather than recognizing these new hunger cues, this person then says, well, I'm going to wait and I'm going to wait till I get home from work and then I will eat something. So again, disregarding those hunger cues, going home, and when this person gets home, she ends up raiding her cupboards and overeating on foods that don't fit into that healthy eating category. And then she feels guilty and horrible about herself because the food police are still present and the nutrition informant is there as well, disguised as healthy eating, but really because all of this is still going on, this person's still really struggling with their eating. So the takeaway from this is that you can't renovate diet culture or diet mentality and call it a healthy lifestyle and assume that it's going to have a different impact on your mentality or your behaviors. And the last voice that people who chronically diet or engage in disordered eating might recognize is the diet rebel. And this would be the part of yourself that's burnt out with dieting and wants to rebel. The diet rebel is the part of dieting that creates that really difficult push-pull between all or nothing thinking. It's the part of ourselves that will follow the nutrition informant's rules all throughout the day, is really good according to the food police, and then says, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm gonna eat whatever I want. However, oftentimes this leads to sneaky eating or eating something that you're not gonna put down in your food log because you feel guilty about it. And it sets people up, especially those who experience binge eating, to be more secretive about their eating. We feel all kinds of guilt and shame because we actually really do want to eat these foods. However, they're forbidden to us by the food police. And the real challenge with this is that rebellious behavior of the diet rebel has no limits and is really destructive. And from my experience working with clients, I think it is really a case of the food police and the diet rebel working together, and these experiences with having this limitless, rebellious eating that's so destructive that causes them to have that fear that if I don't continue to follow these restrictive eating habits, that I'm going to lose all control and I'm going to overeat and it's going to be really not great for my overall well-being. And I can totally empathize with that because the diet rebel does feel like it's on the loose and it can't be contained. But what I want you to recognize is that the diet rebel is born out of a combination of the food police and the nutrition informant working together to be really controlling and restrictive of your eating. And this is that all or nothing relationship that happens with chronic dieting and chronic restrictive eating, and not a true reflection of what will happen when you repair your relationship with food and your body and find peace and freedom from food. But I do recognize that fear is there, and I think it's an honest feeling based on past experiences with the diet rebel. And I also want to recognize that it can be really hard to wrap your head around the idea that things could be different. But I'd like you to try to keep an open mind while I go through the rest of this video, because it is possible, and it's possible for you too. Now let's move on to the intuitive eating voices that people who consider themselves intuitive eaters hear. The first is the food anthropologist, and anyone who is familiar with mindfulness will probably hear some similarities or things that they can relate to with the food anthropologist. The food anthropologist is a neutral observer, so it observes what's happening for you without making any judgments, which is totally different than the food police. It notices your hunger, it notices your fullness, it recognizes when you eat, what you eat, how you feel when you eat. And one way to tune into your food anthropologist is to keep a food journal or a mindful eating log. And for people who have chronically dieted, this can be a really challenging exercise because typically when they write down what they're eating, they're doing it in a way to evaluate or appraise, to determine if they should have eaten what they ate, or if maybe there's something that they're ashamed of that's there on that food log. And when you're trying to do this from the perspective of the food anthropologist, you're just collecting data. There's no right or wrong, there's no moral value, it just is what it is. If you're interested in trying this out and using a food log, I've created a mindful eating log that I use in my practice very often with my clients, and I've provided a link in the description box down below where you can download this and give it a try. It's important to recognize though, and really be aware when you're using this mindful eating log, that it is a tool for information and for curiosity, and it's not a tool for judgment. The next voice that intuitive eaters experience is the nurturer. The nurturer is compassionate and gentle and reassures you. Some people recognize this voice as a mature, caring adult. It's the part of ourselves that taps into the emotional side of eating and permits that all foods are allowed and that there's sometimes really good reasons why we eat what we eat. But then is also curious and helpful with helping us to consider what's happening for us when we're eating these foods. And this is the opposite of the judgment that would be experienced with the food police. The next voice that people recognize with intuitive eating is the nutrition ally. And the nutrition ally actually shares a lot of strengths the nutrition informant has, except it does it all without an agenda. The nutrition ally helps us make choices about foods based on health rather than diet. You'll recognize the nutrition ally when you make a choice about food based on health and you don't experience that emotion of guilt. When we feel guilt as a result of a health choice, that means that the food police are present. The next voice that people experience when they're engaging in intuitive eating is the rebel ally, which grows out of the diet rebel. Similar to the diet rebel, it recognizes when its boundaries have been crossed and it's been pushed too far. And it harnesses the power of the diet rebel and uses it in an assertive way. It's the part of you that begins to be able to be assertive and speak up around people who push diet culture on you, and perhaps push against your intuitive eating and your fullness cues when you know you're already satisfied and don't want any more food. These voices together are incorporated into the intuitive eater voice. It listens to the helpful and gentle messages from the food anthropologist, the nutrition ally, the diet ally, and the nurturer. And the intuitive eater voice honors your gut reactions rather than seeking information externally from diet culture or food rules of the food police and its team of diet culture voices. So the task I leave you with is working on to evoke these helpful intuitive eating voices to develop your ability to eat intuitively. In today's video, we've talked in depth about the food police and how the messages we we receive from our diet ingrained culture have an insidious impact on our relationship with our food and our bodies. We also began learning about how to develop your internal intuitive eater for greater food freedom and peace. Stay tuned for next week's video, which will be published on Wednesday, where I'll talk about how to cultivate your internal intuitive eater with real-life examples and scenarios. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I've created a mindful eating log, which is a tool that I frequently use in my practice with my clients who experience binge eating and other eating disorder behaviors. I've provided a link for it in the description box down below where you can go and download it for your own use. And remember to tune into your food anthropologist when you're using this log and avoid judging your food choices. You're going to want to check out the rest of my videos on eating disorders, binge eating, and intuitive eating. So I provided links to these videos in the description box down below so you can get started. If you've enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend or anyone who you think would benefit from learning more about binge eating or intuitive eating. I look forward to seeing you in the next video on Wednesday.